Alright, so we are going to Mars, or Duna as it's called in KSP. We've got a rover that I designed. Well, I didn't really design it, I just tweaked it just a little bit. Did build the rocket though, and we're going to be taking this thing and launching it and sending it up to Duna, and hopefully we'll be able to get there in one piece. At least I really hope so. So let's get to it, get ready to launch. Alright, so if you notice, I had to drop it down to 60% throttle right before launch. The reason being, the roll is initiated just a little bit too soon, and it's about a 1 out of 3 chance that as soon as you launch and you start to roll, you end up hitting with the SRBs on the tower, and that's never good. We just had good SRB separation. These are asparagus staged, so makes life a little bit easier in terms of the whole thrust to weight ratio deal, and trying to get the most delta V possible in order to get us into orbit. Use this same configuration that you see here to launch what I call the KSS, which is the Kerbal Space Station. Real simple. So let's see. Surface speed's a little over 400 meters per second. Also, if you notice, we have to limit our angle of attack to about 2 degrees just to avoid, you know, essentially ripping the rocket apart. Looks like we're experiencing max Q. You know, we're up to about 20 kilometers now. Speed relative to the surface is almost 700 meters per second. We're coming up on Mach 2.2. Now, our apoapsis height is targeted at 100 kilometers. So we're trying to get into a low Earth orbit, or a low Kerbin orbit, LKO, essentially as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and we park in a low orbit before we begin to set up a maneuver to get us out into space and into a trajectory to intersect with Duna. So we just had Mako, our main engine, cut off, and at this point we're just going to be coasting out into space. Solar panels, have them set to auto deploy as soon as they're safe, and that way we have, you know, more than enough power to control the spacecraft, because we are using inline reaction wheels. And you can see now we're slowly getting up. Got a little ways to go. Also, we have a little over 1,600 meters per second that we need to achieve delta V wise. It's going to be a burn. Approximately, according to the computer right now, is a little over 2 minutes, but it's probably going to be a little bit less than that. We are going to burn a little bit early. So let's say 1,600 meters per second. That's going to get us into LKO, and we should have plenty of delta V left to get us to Duna, with a couple course corrections mid-course, and then of course actually getting down onto the surface. Alright, we just started our burn. Sure is a pretty ship. Alright, we're at 100 kilometers now, and you should start to see the line of our trajectory begin to fall around the planet onto the other side. And what we'd like to happen is that to continue to fall until we get into orbit. And once we're in orbit, we want both apoapsis height and periapsis to be as close to 100 kilometers as possible. And you can see we just had the first stage jettison. We're now burning on the second stage. This is essentially just a 2-stage rocket. The third stage is just a payload, but I believe it's 6 or 7 stages according to, or might even be 8 stages according to Kerbal, just due to the asparagus and all that stuff. So there we go. There is 100 kilometers, close enough. It's not perfectly eccentric, but I mean it's close enough to work. So we can totally make that work. Just get you a decent view here. Sure, it's a pretty view. And you'll notice here in a second we're going to do a little crossfade. I actually had an issue with an autosave, so we are coming back from an autosave, and we're going to set up our maneuver node. Now I am using MechJeb. It makes my life a little bit easier. I have flown this multiple times in the past manually, but just for the sake of making a video, let's just do it with MechJeb. So you can see with MechJeb, there's our maneuver node. It's going to be coming up here in a little bit. And what we're trying to do is escape from Kerbin. We're setting up a trajectory to escape from Kerbin, and as you can see, as we escape, we'll eventually arrive over at Duna. Alright, so a little bit of a crossfade here. You'll see us approaching our maneuver node and beginning our burn. Definitely a pretty spacecraft. Alright, we just initiated the burn. A little over 1,000 meters per second delta V is required to get us in a transition over to Duna. This is the most efficient way to get us there. Not necessarily just by using MechJeb, but it's considered the most efficient just given the timing. I made sure that we had the perfect launch window, and we're doing our burn here at the perfect moment. So we're using as little delta V as possible, which leaves more delta V in the very end to essentially get us out, out into orbit or into the sphere of influence with Duna. And once we are in the sphere of influence, we're going to do a small burn. We might end up using RCS thrusters, one or the other. And we're going to essentially crash this stage into Duna, because we already have another rover there that has seismic sensors, so we can do some experiments with that. But once we do that, we're going to try to approach with the payload and not burn up in the atmosphere, not have a failure of chutes, not crash with the essentially the landing system, which is rather complex. It could be a lot more complex, but it's complex enough to cause problems if we're not careful. So as you just saw, we're now into an escape trajectory. We're heading out toward Duna, and you can see our path. It extends out of the orbit from Kerbin, and we actually have an encounter with Duna now. So begin our time warp again. We are warping away from the planet, and you can see, I mean, we've got a ways to go. It's quite a large solar system, even in KSP terms, but yeah, and you got an awesome view looking back. So this is fairly similar to something like the Curiosity mission and all that good stuff, but just for the sake of simplicity, I went ahead and kind of modified the mission parameters quite a bit just to suit me. So what we're doing now, we just set up a course correction burn to get us essentially down to about 13 kilometers or so on the periapsis, which should be a fairly safe re-entry. Delta V required is less than 4 meters per second. Right now it's showing 3.7, and it's 133 days away. So we've got quite a ways before this course correction comes up. So we are going to begin our time warp. You see it just kicked right back down to 90. And let's see. Not sure if I can bring it back up. Yep. every once in a while it's going to kick itself back out just so it can line up with our target, with the TCS and all that good stuff. So we're rather quickly approaching our mid-course correction burn. You can see Duna is up to the top right. Really not all that far away. Now this 4 meters per second burn should be more than enough to get us into a rather good encounter here with Duna. At least that's what the hope is. So just a few hours away now. Start backing down the time acceleration. Every once in a while it will kind of glitch out here, and it either will completely forget or just screw it up. So I just went ahead right then, just to be safe, and killed all those nodes, or used remove all nodes to remove that last node and create and execute a new one using just a 1 times time acceleration. And now, I mean, it's close enough that we should be right on the money. Even though we're about a minute or so late, we should be right on the money because it's only a 4 meter per second burn. We can easily correct for that. We do have plenty of delta V left over. So there's a burn. We're now complete. SAS re-engage. You can see the solar panels are getting plenty of sun. So that's obviously not going to be a problem. Now, let's see. Go back to our orbit map. Start accelerating again. Still got a good encounter. Now what I'd like to do is fine-tune this just a little bit, just to make sure that we end up on target. You know, we don't want to come in too steep or too shallow. So 13 kilometers is going to be my target for this one. Now fine-tune really won't work at this point, but what we can do is go into change our periapts, and we can change our periapts once we're inside the SOI. We can change it to 13, and we should be okay. Might have to do that burn manually, which again, I'd imagine it's less than 1 or 2 meters per second. I'd estimate probably about a half a meter per second. So let's see. Oh, thought we were in there, but we're not. We're just outside the SOI. So here's our encounter node, and boom, there we go. Okay, so now let's move around. There's a good view of Duna. Let's see. Let's try this just to see what happens. So for 13 kilometers, nope, not gonna do it. Yep, it's not gonna let us because we were within the SOI. So change our periapts. Where are you? There you are. Alright, change it to 13. I'm going to create a node. We're going to do it after a set time, which is essentially immediately, because if we do it at our Apple apps, there is none, because we're coming in on a rather hot trajectory here. We don't have an Apple apps. So there's our periapts. Right now it's a little high. We would end up just sailing right by and then out into space. So what we're going to do is create a node, try to execute, and get this thing down to 13. You can see we're starting to pitch back around toward our target node. We have to get this thing down to about 13, or else if it's too high, we just end up flying out into space and we never come back. If it's too low, we burn up and we slam. We either burn up in the atmosphere, even though it's extremely thin, or we just slam into the surface. So there's our burn. Boom. Should be just about close enough. We might have to fine-tune that just a hair, but we're going to get just a little bit closer, just to make sure the numbers are right. The math checks out, and it does. So what this means is we are going to try to drop it just a little bit more, just a little bit, and get it down to 13. Just that amount of moving around right there, that was enough to throw us off even more. So we're burning at like 5% right now. I'm going to try to bring our periaps down to 13 with very, 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 very small burn. You can see it up there at the top left. So once it's down to about 13, we should be fine. It doesn't have to be exact, it's just close. Go back to orbit map. Yeah, 14, 13. That's good enough. I don't see that being a problem at all. Alright, so now we get to jettison the main payload. There you can see the heat shield. Now we have control of the final stage. Now our RCS thrusters, just to get us away from the payload, is enough to actually modify our orbit that much. So you can see how little delta V is required when you come in on this efficient of an approach. Now what I was actually doing was trying to kind of slew away from it, kind of translate to the side, and that way if I had to do a burn with the main engine, I would be able to do so without damaging the spacecraft. But you can see the little probe marker. It's supposed to be a rover marker. I forgot to change it, but we're going to try to hit that mountain. It's a few hundred kilometers away. Back to our spacecraft. Still showing about 13. That's good enough for me. So we can switch back over here in a minute to our view from the outside, and we can actually watch our approach. So you can see Ike, which is the moon on Duna. We have to also take that into consideration, the two on approaches, because the gravity from Ike is enough to throw us off if your approach isn't just right. Or of course, you can slam into it too, which is a very bad way to end a day. So you can see the channels. There's our other rover. You can see little channels, little valleys running down. Looks like riverbeds. That's our target. I figured there's, could be gold in them there hills. So we're going to try to land down in the valley. Just switch everything over to surface mode now. Make sure heat is up on the flight engineer. And we should be good. I'm going to start warping in. You see the glow from the atmosphere as well off in the distance. Alright, so there's our re-entry effects. You can see the heat starting to build up. Heat shield's going to be taking a beating here in a minute. As long as it holds up, that's all that matters. Now you can actually see the valley kind of off to the right that we're trying to land in. And right now I'm just watching the thermal data just to make sure the critical part stays saying heat shield, which you see it flip-flopping, which is not good. As long as it holds, we should be fine. The rover is actually taking some heat right now, but it should be okay. Down to about 19% or so for critical. Alright, slowly starting to die down. Now at this point, we need to make sure that we jettison our fairing and deploy parachutes at the right moment. Then we're going to jettison the heat shield in the bottom half of the payload, and at that point we're also going to be cutting away the parachutes. So we're going to be under our own control, and we're going to have to actually fly this thing down. I'm going to be doing that manually. MechJeb does have an option to do it automatic, but I'd rather just land this thing manually. I actually trust myself. So MechJeb does a fine job, but it's more fun and more rewarding if you actually do it on your own. So at this point we're just watching our radar altitude, which is altitude above the terrain. And you see there are variances in the terrain, but for the most part we are down in this riverbed. So we should be good. You can see once we jettison our fairings there, how fast we're actually just decelerating as you watch little pieces kind of fall away from us. So activate all these engines, make sure every one of these engines, all four, are active. If we forget to do that, then yeah, they don't burn when we need them to burn, or if all of them aren't active, you get a lot of torque, and obviously you end up crashing. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle on our sensors that are on the Rover, just so we can get some data. And I screwed that up. There we go. Alright, so we got all 3 chutes open. Now you will see them clipped together. It's kind of annoying, but it's just KSP for you. We're starting to see the ground scatter and boulders and all that crap starting to show up. The iron oxide type orange glow from the atmosphere, so we're well inside the atmosphere now, and we're just about at full density. At this point, we're a little over 1 click up in the air, rapidly descending. There's our chutes fully deployed. Alright, so at this point we're going to be gliding down very slowly, hopefully right around 12 meters per second. We're going to continue this straight down to about 150 or 160 meters before we jettison and cut away everything from underneath it. And of course I had to hiccup. Alright, we're getting there. A little under 200 now, and jettison. Alright, now we have control of the craft. It doesn't take a whole lot of throttle. There's the impact, which it's a little overdone for me, but whatever. So now it's just a matter of fine-tuning this descent with just a little bit of throttle, 5 to 10%. We got more than enough fuel. We're trying to land at less than 2 meters per second, preferably less than 1 meter per second. I like to touch down between 0.5 and 1, very gently, and then we're going to cut away the descent module now. And there it goes. And we are on the surface of Duna. Nice flat little area. Didn't land on top of any boulders. Didn't land too hard. Get the comm antenna up. Now keep in mind, I'm not using the shit, I can't remember what it's called now, but the realistic time delay mess where you have to have satellites you put in orbit and all have communication with each other and communication with Kerbin, and there's a delay just like there would be in the real world. I believe it's anywhere from like 14 to like 45 minutes or so, depending on the relations in orbits between Earth and Mars. So it's about the same here between Kerbin and Duna. So I went ahead and I turned all the remote tech. I went ahead and disabled that just because it's a little annoying, and I didn't feel like having to sit down and program the whole descent, which I might end up doing at some point, but I'm a little pressed for time. So anyways, we're just driving around. I want to go sit near this boulder and call it a day. And that's essentially how you get to Mars and land an orbiter, or Duna, or land a rover, sorry. But you zoom out a little bit and you can see how lonely we are on this planet. I love it.